The gravel lot at Glendale Railard sat under a low grey sky the color of old pewter, and the wind that came off the empty freight tracks carried the smell of rust and diesel, and something older than either, something like time itself gone sour. Nelly Whitaker stood in the middle of that lot with a black trash bag at her feet and $40 folded twice in the inside pocket of her jacket. And she looked at the locked wooden boxcar the way a woman looks at a door she has not decided whether to open. She was 67 years old. She had slept the previous night on a bench in Glendale Park with a piece of cardboard pulled over her legs, and the temperature
We've
dropping
reviewed
to
the
41
documents,
degrees.
and unfortunately,
Her
the
back
situation
hurt in a
remains
place that had
unchanged.
never hurt
We
before.
must adhere to the
Her hands
instructions
folded
here.
now inside the pockets of
I
a coat
highly
she had
recommend
owned for
the
11
science program
winters
at this one.
were cold in a
It
way
provides
that felt permanent.
excellent
3
preparation.
days earlier, her own children had put her out of the
As you can
house on
see in the
Maple
summer
Street,
camps guide
where
here,
she had
the
lived for
programs are
31
designed to be
years.
both
They had done it in
educational
the living room
and
over
engaging
coffee
for
she
the
had made
students.
for them, with a folder of papers already prepared. They had used the word burden. They had said it without blinking. But before we go back to the beginning, before we walk through how a woman like Nelly Whitaker ended up bidding $40 on a boxcar that
I
hadn't
just
been
don't
opened in
understand how
over
we got
100
here.
years.
I try
Tell us
and
where
I
you're
try,
watching
and it
from
feels like you
tonight.
aren't even listening
And if
to me.
this story reaches you the way I think it will, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I have set aside something special for you. To understand how Nelly Whitaker came to stand in that gravel lot on the first day of November 2024, you have to go back further than the eviction, further than the boxcar, further than any auction. You have to go back to the woman she had been before life began to take things from her one layer at a time until almost nothing remained. Nelly was born in Clarksburg, West Virginia in the spring of 1957, the second of 4 children in a family that never had much money but always had pride. Her father worked the Baltimore and Ohio line for 32 years, coming home each night smelling of coal smoke and machine oil. His hands so worn the calluses had calluses. Her mother took in laundry and cleaned houses in the good neighborhoods above the river. From the time Nelly was old enough to hold a broom, she understood that dignity was not something the world handed you. It was something you built quietly, stubbornly, one honest day at a time. She married young. His name was Walter Whitaker, a soft-spoken man who worked at the Clarksburg lumber mill and loved crossword puzzles and strong black coffee and the sound of freight trains passing in the night. They were not rich. They were not close to rich. But they built a modest life together in a 2-bedroom house on Maple Street that Walter bought in 1977 with years of careful saving and a small loan from his uncle. They had 2 children. Bradford came first in 1978. A serious boy, ambitious even as a child, always with his eyes fixed on something bigger than Clarksburg. Corinne came 3 years later, sharper and louder than her brother. The kind of girl who could argue her way out of any punishment and charm her way into any opportunity. Nelly raised them mostly alone. Walter was a good man, but not a healthy one. He carried chronic pain in his back from years at the mill, and by his mid-40s, the pain had turned into something worse. The medical bills came slowly at first, then all at once like a dam giving way. Nelly took 2 jobs to keep the house. She worked the morning shift at Millie's Diner on Route 19, starting at 4 in the morning, and she cleaned offices for a property management company 3 afternoons a week. She did this for 20 years without complaining, without asking anyone for help, without ever once letting her children see how close to the edge the family was living. She made sure Bradford had new shoes when the school year started. She made sure Corinne had the right textbooks, the right dress for the winter formal, the right sense that the world was open to her even when the bank account said otherwise. Nelly skipped meals to cover the utility bill. She wore her winter coat 3 seasons past when it should have been replaced. She told herself none of it mattered. What mattered was that her children have what they needed to build their own futures. And build them they did. Bradford graduated near the top of his class and left Clarksburg on a partial scholarship to study business in Pittsburgh. He never really came back, not in any meaningful way. He built a career in corporate finance, married a woman named Diane, who wore expensive perfume and referred to Clarksburg as that little town, and settled into a comfortable life in a suburb of Cincinnati. He called on birthdays sometimes, and on Christmas usually. Corinne took a different path, but arrived at the same destination. She went to cosmetology school, built a successful salon business in Charleston, and married twice. Her second husband, an investment consultant named Grant Holloway, had money and opinions and a clear sense that Nelly did not quite fit into the life Corinne was building. Walter passed in March of 2015, quietly in the same bedroom where they had slept for 31 years. Nelly held his hand when he went. She organized the funeral on a budget so tight she had to borrow $500 from a neighbor named Rita Boone to cover the casket. Neither Bradford nor Corinne offered to help with the cost. They attended the service, said the right things, hugged their mother at the graveside, and returned to their lives within 48 hours. After Walter died, Nelly stayed in the house on Maple Street. It was paid off, left to her outright, one of the few things Walter had managed to protect through all the medical debt. On her Social Security of $1,140 a month and her part-time hours at Millie's Diner, she made it work. Barely, but she made it work. She kept the yard tidy. She kept herself tidy. She kept her dignity intact the way her parents had taught her. Quietly, stubbornly. One honest day at a time. That was the woman Nelly Whitaker had always been. Not loud, not demanding, not a burden to anyone. Just a mother who had given everything she had for decades and asked for nothing in return, not even gratitude. She should have known that would not be enough. She should have known some debts do not get paid, they only get forgotten. But Nelly, who had spent her whole life believing in people, did not see it coming until the morning. Her own children sat down in her own living room and told her it was time to go. It happened on a Tuesday in October the 22nd, and the coordination should have told her something was wrong. Bradford and Corinne had not been in the same room since Walter's funeral, and even then they had barely spoken. The fact that they had coordinated, that they had driven in from separate cities and arrived at the same time on a Tuesday morning, meant they had planned this. Whatever was about to happen had been decided long before either of them crossed her front porch. She had made coffee. She had even set out a small plate of the butter cookies she kept in the cabinet above the stove, the ones Bradford had loved when he was a boy. She had told herself it was just a visit, maybe a surprise. Maybe they were finally coming to be present in her life the way she had always hoped they would, quietly. She had smoothed her hair in the hallway mirror before opening the door, and she had smiled when she saw them standing on her porch. That smile did not last long. They sat in the living room. Bradford took the recliner across from the couch where Nelly sat. Corinne sat beside her brother, which in itself was unusual. They were presenting a united front, and Nelly felt the room shift before either of them spoke. Mama Bradford began in the voice she recognized as his business voice, the one he used when he had already made a decision and was simply delivering the outcome. "We need to talk about your situation." Nelly kept her hands folded in her lap. "What situation is that?" "This house," Corinne said, glancing around the living room, as if appraising it. "It's getting to be too much for you. The roof has that leak you mentioned in the spring. The furnace is old. The property tax went up again this year." "I've been managing," Nelly said carefully. "You've been struggling," Bradford corrected. "Mama, you're 67 years old. You're working part-time at the diner. You can barely cover your expenses. We've been talking and we think it's time for a real plan." They had a plan. Of course they did. They had researched it, printed documents, brought a folder. The folder sat on Bradford's knee, and just seeing it made Nelly's stomach drop before he even opened it. 6 months earlier, at another family dinner that had felt a little too orchestrated. In retrospect, Bradford had suggested Nelly put both her children's names on the deed to the house for tax purposes. He had said it would make things easier if anything happened to her. No probate, no complications. "We're family. We'll make sure you're taken care of." She had signed the paperwork without reading every line. She had trusted her son. Why wouldn't she? He was her son. Now Bradford opened the folder and laid out what that signature had made possible. They had found a buyer for the house on Maple Street, a young couple from out of town who wanted to renovate. The offer was $215,000. Nelly's share after costs would be used to fund her placement in a residential care facility in Morgantown called Sunrise Gardens. Nelly asked to see the brochure. It showed cheerful photographs of elderly residents playing cards and tending small potted plants. A single room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over a parking lot. The monthly cost was $2,900. My social security is $1,140, Nelly said quietly. The sale of the house covers the difference for a few years. Corinne said, not quite meeting her eyes. And after that, we'll figure something out. Figure something out, Nelly repeated. Mama, you can't keep living here alone, Bradford said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who had rehearsed his argument and was frustrated. It wasn't landing cleanly. What if you fall? What if the furnace goes out in January? You're isolated out here. It's not safe. I've lived in this house for 31 years, Nelly said. I raised you two in this house. We know, Corinne said, and we're grateful, but things change. You're a burden, Mama. Bradford said it without blinking, without looking down, without any apparent awareness of what those words would cost to hear. Not intentionally, but you are. The calls about the roof, the worry about whether you're eating right, whether the heat is working. We have our own families. We have responsibilities. We can't keep carrying this. The word landed like something physical. Burden. Nelly sat with it for a moment, turning it over in her mind the way you turn over a rock and look at what's underneath. When do you need me out? She asked finally. They looked slightly surprised, as if they had expected more of a fight. Bradford recovered first. Closing is in 3 weeks. The facility has a room available the 1st of next month. We can arrange movers for your personal things. And then, just as they were rising from the couch to leave, Corinne said something that changed everything. Wren won't understand, but she'll adjust. Nelly went still. Wren! Nelly had never heard that name spoken in her own house. She had never seen a photograph. She had never received a card, a phone call, an announcement. Who is Wren? She said. The room went silent. Corinne's face flushed a color Nelly had not seen since her daughter was 15, and caught in a lie about a boy from the next county. Bradford looked at his sister with the exasperation of a man watching a business deal come apart at the last second. Corinne, Bradford said. I thought you told her. Corinne said, though her voice made it clear she knew perfectly well he had not. Nelly's hands were still folded in her lap. She had not moved. My daughter, she said. And her voice was so quiet the room seemed to lean in to hear it. Who is Wren? Corinne sat back down slowly. Wren is my daughter, she said. She's 6 years old. Nelly had a granddaughter. A granddaughter she had never seen, never held, never spoken to. A granddaughter who had lived 6 full years on this earth without ever knowing that her grandmother existed less than 80 miles away. Why, Nelly said. That was the only word she could find. Why? Gran thought it was better, Corinne said. And to her credit, she at least had the decency to look at the floor when she said it. He said, with your situation, the diner, the way you live it would be confusing for her. We were going to tell her when she was older, when she could understand. Understand what Nelly said. Corinne did not answer. Nelly sat very still on the couch. Something inside her, some last small thread that had connected her to the woman she had been that morning, when she made coffee and set out butter cookies, quietly broke. 6 years, 6 birthdays, 6 Christmases. A child had learned to walk and to talk and to draw pictures, and Nelly had not been allowed to see any of it, because the man her daughter had married did not think a woman who worked at a diner was fit to be a grandmother. She looked at Corinne and she looked at Bradford, and she saw them both very clearly, perhaps for the first time in her life. She saw the children she had raised at the cost of her own body, her own back, her own winters spent in a coat that should have been replaced. She saw what they had become in the world she had built for them, and she saw that she did not know either of them anymore. She stood up. "Get out of my house," she said. "Both of you, please leave." They left without arguing, which told her more than anything else could have. Corinne stopped at the door and said something about it being for the best. Bradford said he would call her at the end of the week. Neither of them called. For 6 days, Nelly moved through the house on Maple Street like a woman in a dream. She packed some things. She unpacked them. She sat at the kitchen table for hours at a time, staring at the wallpaper Walter had helped her hang in 1983. She thought about Wren. She thought about a small girl she had never met who was somewhere out there in the world. And she thought about whether the child ever asked about her grandmother and what her mother told her when she did. On the morning of October the 28th, Eleanor Whitaker packed what she could carry into 2 trash bags and a small canvas duffel. 31 years of her life reduced to what fit in her arms. She left the furniture. She left the dishes. She left the curtains she had sewn herself. She left the garden tools and Walter's old crossword books stacked beside the back door. She left everything. She walked out of the house on Maple Street at 8 in the morning, and she did not look back. Not because she did not want to, but because looking back would have broken something in her she was not sure she could repair. She had $43 in her wallet and nowhere to go. She spent the first night in the waiting area of a Salvation Army shelter on Monroe Avenue that had no beds available but let her sit until 11 o'clock when they locked the doors. She walked 3 blocks to a covered bus stop and sat on the cold metal bench with her trash bags at her feet and her duffel in her lap. And she watched the streetlights reflect on the wet pavement until morning came. She did not cry. She had done her crying privately in the shelter bathroom with the tap running, so no one would hear. Out here on the bench, she kept her face still and her eyes forward. She was 67 years old, and she had nothing, but she still had her dignity. And dignity she had learned from her mother was the only thing no one could take from you unless you handed it over yourself. On the second day, she found a church on Elm Street that served a hot breakfast to anyone who walked through the door without asking questions. She ate oatmeal and drank black coffee, and she sat at a long folding table beside a man named Curtis Ainsley, who had lost his job on the railroad 8 months earlier, and a young woman with a small boy in her lap who did not give her name. Nelly did not give hers either. They ate in the particular silence of people who understand each other without needing to explain anything. She spent the second night on a bench in Glendale Park with a sheet of cardboard she had found behind a grocery store spread over her legs for warmth. The temperature dropped to 41 degrees. She pulled every piece of clothing she owned out of the trash bags and layered them on, and she told herself she had survived harder things than a cold night on a park bench. Although in that particular moment she was struggling to remember what those things were. On the morning of the third day, she went back to the church for breakfast. And afterward, she sat in the small reading room off the main hall, where donated magazines and newspapers were kept on a wire rack near the window. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was simply trying to stay warm and occupy her mind with something other than the arithmetic of her situation. The notice was tucked inside a copy of the Clarksburg Post from 2 days earlier, folded open to the classified section. A small box near the bottom of the page, easy to miss. Harrison County Salvage Auction. Saturday, November 1st, 10 a.m. Glendale Railard off Route 7. Surplus and abandoned property, including vehicles, equipment, and rolling stock. Minimum bid $1. Cash only. All sales final. Nelly read the notice twice. Then she looked at the date on the newspaper. Today was Thursday, October 30th. The auction was in 2 days. She sat back in her chair, and she thought about it carefully. She had $38 left after buying a pair of thick socks at the dollar store the afternoon before. She had nowhere to sleep that was warm or safe. She had no family willing to take her in, and no friends with spare rooms. The assisted living facility Bradford and Corinne had selected required a deposit she could not pay and a cosigner she did not have. She was going to be homeless regardless of what she did next. The only question was whether she would be homeless with nothing to her name or homeless with something, even if that something was unclear. even if it was a shot in the dark, even if it was the kind of idea that sounded desperate because it was desperate. She tore the notice carefully from the newspaper, folded it, and slipped it into her coat pocket. Saturday morning, she stood in the gravel lot at Glendale Railard at 9:45. The yard was a wide, flat expanse of gravel and dead grass fenced in wire on 3 sides and backed by a row of trees on the 4th. Rusted equipment sat in rows, old backhoes, stripped vehicle carcasses, spools of cable, engine parts so corroded they were barely identifiable. A small crowd had already gathered near a folding table where a heavy-set man in an orange vest was organizing paperwork. This was Harvey Dodd, the county auctioneer, a man who had the efficient and slightly bored energy of someone who had been selling other people's abandoned things for a living for too long. About 40 people wandered the yard, most of them men in work jackets. Contractors, scrappers, small dealers who knew how to spot value in other people's discards. They walked the rows with practiced eyes, kicking tires, lifting lids, doing calculations. No one paid Nelly any attention. A small elderly woman with 2 trash bags and a canvas duffel was not their competition. She walked the rows slowly, looking at everything, knowing she could afford almost none of it, knowing she needed something she could actually use. Then she saw the boxcar. It sat at the far end of the yard, half hidden behind a row of rusted equipment, separated from everything else, as if even the other discarded things wanted nothing to do with it. It was an old wooden freight car, probably built sometime in the early 20th century, maybe earlier. The wood was dark with age and weather. The metal fittings along the sides were red with rust. It sat on a section of disconnected track that ended abruptly in the gravel, going nowhere. What stopped Nelly was not the boxcar itself, it was the door. The freight door on the side of the car was secured with a heavy iron padlock, old and thick, the kind they stopped making decades ago. Everything else in this yard had been rifled through, stripped open, emptied. This car had never been opened. Whatever was inside had been locked and left, and no one in however many years this car had been sitting in this yard had bothered to find out what it was. Nelly stood in front of it for a long moment, hands in her coat pockets, the cold November wind moving through the yard around her. Then Harvey Dodd called for everyone's attention, and the auction began. The auction moved fast. Dodd had the practiced rhythm of a man who wanted to be done by noon. He worked through the rows, methodically calling each item, taking bids, banging his clipboard like a gavel when a sale was made. Contractors bid on the heavy equipment. Scrappers fought over metal spools and engine parts. Everyone seemed to know what they wanted before they arrived, and the whole thing had the feel of a transaction that had already been decided, with the auction itself being merely a formality. Nelly stood near the back of the crowd and waited. When Dodd finally reached the boxcar, he stopped in front of it and consulted his clipboard with the expression of a man reading something he did not quite believe. "All right," he announced loud enough to carry across the yard. "Last item of the day. What we have here is a wooden freight car of unknown origin and manufacture, donated to the county by the estate of Harold Griggs, deceased. Mr. Griggs apparently collected things without asking a lot of questions. The car sits on approximately 30 feet of disconnected track, which is included in the sale. Condition is, as you see it. No one has been inside. No one knows what is in it. The padlock is original, and the key, if one ever existed, is not in our possession." A murmur ran through the crowd. A few people stepped forward for a closer look. Most stayed where they were. "We will not be breaking the padlock prior to sale," Dodd continued. "You buy it, you open it. Whatever's inside is yours. Could be empty. Could be full of bats." Some people laughed. "Minimum bid is $1. Who wants to start?" Silence. One of the contractors near the front shrugged and said something to the man beside him. A scrapper in a green jacket walked around the car, once knocked on the wood in 2 places, shook his head and walked away. The car was too far from the road to be moved easily, and too deteriorated to have obvious scrap value. Nobody wanted the liability of hauling it out of the yard. $1, Dodd repeated with the patience of a man who had done this before. Someone. $40, Nelly said from the back of the crowd. Every head turned. The reaction was almost exactly what she expected. The same slow appraisal, the same conclusion. Small elderly woman trash bags at her feet, absolutely no business here. But there was something else too. A ripple of surprise at the number. Not $1, not 5, 40. She had bid a number that meant something. $40 said this was not accident, was not confusion. This was a decision. $40 from the lady in the back. Dodd said, his voice carefully neutral. Do I hear 45? Ma'am, you don't even know what's in there, the scrapper in the green jacket called. Not cruelly, but with genuine bewilderment. Could be nothing. Could be worse than nothing. $40, Nelly repeated evenly. Dodd looked around the yard. Nobody moved. Nobody raised a hand. Whatever was behind that padlock, nobody here wanted it badly enough to spend $41 finding out. Going once at $40, going twice. He paused. Sold. Ma'am, please come forward and complete your paperwork. She counted out 2 20s on the folding table while Dodd filled out the transfer form. The scrapper in the green jacket watched her do it and shook his head slowly. One of the contractors said something quietly that made the man beside him smirk. Nelly kept her eyes on the paperwork and her hands steady. Dodd handed her a receipt and a single document confirming transfer of ownership. You'll need to arrange removal of the car within 60 days, he said. County can't store it indefinitely. I understand, Nelly said. Need help getting into it. I'll manage. Getting to the boxcar proved to be its own challenge. Nelly had no car and no money for a cab. She asked Dodd if there was anyone at the yard who could give her a ride, explaining that she intended to stay with the car, that it was her property now, and she had nowhere else to go. She said it plainly without shame, the way her mother had taught her to speak difficult truths. Dodd stared at her for a long moment. Then he called across the yard to a younger man who had been helping with the equipment. Mac, give this lady a hand. Mac Sullivan was a quiet man in his 60s with a gray beard and the broad, careful hands of someone who had spent decades working with wood. He loaded Nelly's bags into his pickup without comment and drove the quarter-mile to where the back section of the rail yard sat adjacent to a narrow access road near Route 7. He helped her carry her bags across the gravel to the boxcar and stood looking at it with her for a moment without speaking. You planning to stay here? He said finally. It was not exactly a question. I am, Nelly said. Mac reached into the bed of the pickup and came back with a heavy pair of bolt cutters. The lock's old, he said. Won't take much. He was right. 2 attempts and the shackle gave way, the old iron parting with a sound like a gunshot in the cold air. The freight door required both of them to pull together, to slide open along its rusted track. It moved inch by inch, groaning and resisting until it was open enough to step through. The smell that came out was old and dry and strangely clean, like the inside of a cedar chest that had been sealed for a very long time. Mac clicked on his flashlight. The beam moved across the interior slowly. Nelly climbed up and stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The boxcar was not empty. Along both interior walls, secured with wooden brackets that had been fitted with care, were rows of large wooden crates. 12 of them, maybe more. Each one was sealed. Each one was labeled with careful black stencil that had faded, but was still legible. The floor was thick with dust, but otherwise intact, the old hardwood planks solid underfoot. Mac lowered the flashlight. Well, he said quietly, it's not bats. Nelly stood in the middle of her $40 boxcar and looked at the crates around her, and she read the stencil on the nearest one. She had to lean close and she had to wipe the dust away with her thumb to make out the letters. Apparatus and Records, Jate Mari, 1902. She stood very still. Outside, the wind moved through the trees at the edge of the yard. The temperature was dropping toward freezing. Through the open freight door, she could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. She had $43 minus 40. $3 a boxcar, 12 sealed crates, a flashlight with an unknown amount of battery life left in it. And for the first time in 3 days, she was standing somewhere that belonged to her. The first week in the boxcar was the hardest thing Nelly Whitaker had ever done, and she had done hard things her whole life. The car provided shelter in the most basic sense of the word. It had walls and a roof and a floor, and after Max Sullivan returned the following morning with a heavy-duty flashlight and helped her slide the freight door almost closed against the cold, it was at least protected from the wind. But it was not warm. The wooden walls, though surprisingly solid for their age, had gaps where the boards had shrunk and separated over decades of freeze and thaw. At night, the temperature inside dropped low enough that Nelly could see her breath, and had to sleep fully dressed with both empty trash bags wrapped around herself for additional insulation. She solved the problems one at a time, the way her mother had taught her to approach anything overwhelming. Don't look at the whole mountain. Pick up one stone. Water first. There was a spigot on the outside wall of the main workshop at the salvage yard left running slightly to prevent freezing. The yard manager, a taciturn man named Dale Prescott, who communicated mostly through nods and shrugs, did not object when Nelly began filling an old plastic jug she had found in the yard. She took this as permission and did not ask for more than that. Food next. She had $3 left after the auction. A mile and a half down Route 7 past Mac's shop and a closed gas station, there was a small country store called Fontaine's that sold groceries and hardware and seemed to sell everything else too, the way small rural stores do when they are the only option for miles. The owner was a woman named Ruby Callahan, 70 years old, a widow of 11 years, compact and direct, with silver hair cut short, and the efficient manner of someone who had been running things alone for a long time. Nelly walked in on the second morning with her hands in her pockets and her jaw set, the way you set your jaw when you are about to spend the last money you have. She bought rice, dried beans, a box of saltines, and a small jar of peanut butter. The total came to $8. She did not have $8, she had $3. Ruby watched her count the money out on the counter, watched her recount it, watched her set the peanut butter back and pick up the saltines, and set the saltines back and reach for the peanut butter again. Then Ruby reached under the counter and pulled out a small notebook. "Put your name in here," Ruby said. "Pay me when you can." Nelly looked up sharply. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," Ruby said. "It's a tab, you'll pay it. I've been running tabs at this store for 38 years. You'd be surprised how few people don't come back." Nelly hesitated. Then she wrote her name in careful cursive in Ruby's notebook. Nelly Whitaker, $8. Ruby capped her pen. "You're the one who bought the old freight car at the Glendale auction." "I am," Nelly said. Max Sullivan mentioned. Ruby set the bag of groceries on the counter. "You planning to stay out there?" "I am." Ruby was quiet for a moment. "I lost my husband 11 years ago come January," she said. "Ran this place alone ever since. I open at 6. I need someone to stock shelves and clean the back room. 3 mornings a week. Early hours, done by 9. I paid $12 an hour cash." Nelly looked at her steadily. "When do I start?" "Monday," Ruby said, 6 sharp. It was the same kind of unexpected grace Nelly had been shown once before at the church breakfast table, and she accepted it the same way. Quietly, completely, without making it smaller by thanking too much. The routine that developed over the following 2 weeks was punishing, but purposeful. 3 mornings a week she walked the mile and a half to Fontaine's in the pre-dawn dark. She worked her 3 hours and walked back. On the other mornings she worked on the boxcar itself. Max stopped by every few days, always with something useful. A wool blanket, a small camp stove that ran on propane canisters, a roll of heavy weather-stripping tape he claimed he had no use for. Together, they sealed the worst of the gaps in the walls, using the tape and strips of heavy tarp Mac cut from a canvas he had in his shop. The difference was immediate and significant. The car held heat now, not much, but enough. The camp stove, used carefully near the open door to prevent carbon monoxide buildup, warmed a small area adequately and let Nelly cook her rice and beans properly. She built a sleeping platform out of wooden pallets Max salvaged from behind his shop, raising herself off the cold floor and creating a space underneath for storage. She organized her belongings with the precise economy of someone who has very little and intends to use everything wisely. She swept the boxcar floor, daily wiped the accumulated dust from the walls, and brought order to the space the way she had always brought order to difficult situations, methodically, without drama, one small improvement at a time. Her body, softened by years of lighter work, hardened quickly. The 2-mile walks twice a day in cold weather. The physical labor of cleaning and building and hauling rebuilt muscles she had not used in years. Her hands developed calluses. Her back, which had ached constantly in the first week, strengthened and settled. She earned $108 in her first week at Fontaine's. Combined with what she had left, it gave her enough to buy propane, more food, and a pair of heavy work gloves that changed the quality of her daily life more than almost anything else. But she still had not opened the crates. She had looked at them every day. She had run her hands along the stenciled labels, trying to make out the faded lettering in the flashlight beam. She had knocked on the wood and listened to the solid sound that came back. She had thought about what might be inside, and she had deliberately stopped herself from speculating too much. Because hope, she had learned, was a thing that had to be rationed carefully when you were living this close to the edge. There was another kind of hope that would not be rationed, however. And on the 5th evening in the boxcar, Nelly put on her coat, walked the half-mile to the payphone at the closed gas station on Route 7, and dialed a number from memory. She was not sure what she was going to say. She had told herself for days that she was not going to call, that there was nothing to say, that her daughter had made her choice and had made it clear. But Nelly had a granddaughter who was 6 years old, and Nelly could not stop thinking that somewhere out there, on this same cold November night, a small girl was going to bed in a house Nelly had never seen, and Nelly did not even know what the child's voice sounded like. She just wanted to hear her voice once. That was all. Once, and she would hang up, and she would go back to the boxcar, and she would let it be enough. The phone rang 3 times. Then a small voice answered. "Hello." Nelly's throat closed. "Hello," the voice said, again patient in the way small children are patient with phones. "Hello," Nelly managed. "Is your mother home?" "She's in the kitchen." "Who is this?" Nelly could not answer. She stood in the freezing dark outside a closed gas station on Route 7 with the phone against her ear, and she could not answer a small child's simple question. She started. Then she stopped. Then she tried again. "I'm your grandma, honey. I'm your grandma, Nelly." The line went silent. For a moment, Nelly thought the child had put the phone down. Then Wren said in a voice so small Nelly had to press the receiver hard against her ear to hear it. "My mama says you went away." "Oh," Nelly whispered. "But I make you a picture every week," Wren said. "I keep them under my pillow, because I thought maybe someday you would come and see them." Nelly put her free hand against the cold glass of the phone booth to hold herself up. Something in her chest was breaking that had not broken yet in all of this. Not when Bradford said the word burden. Not when she carried her trash bags out of the house on Maple Street. Not when she slept on the park bench at 41 degrees. This was different. This was a 6-year-old child telling her grandmother that she had been drawing pictures for a woman she had been told was gone. "Honey," Nelly said, "can you tell me what you draw?" "I draw you and me," Wren said, "and a garden, because Mama said you used to have a garden." "I did," Nelly said. "I did have a garden." There was a rustle on the line. Then Corina's voice, sharp and immediate. "Who is this? Wren, give me the phone. Give me the phone right now." The line went dead. Nelly stood in the phone booth for a long time after that, holding the receiver against her ear, even after the dial tone started. She was crying. But she was not crying the way she had cried in the shelter bathroom that first night. That had been the crying of a woman who had lost everything. This was different. This was the crying of a woman who had just learned that in a house 80 miles away, a small child had been loving her for years without permission. She walked back to the boxcar in the dark. She sat on the pallet bed with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and she thought about Wren, about the pictures under a pillow, about a garden Wren had never seen. And she made herself a promise quietly, the way she had made herself promises her whole life. That child was going to meet her grandmother. Nelly did not know how. She did not know when. but she was not going to die in a boxcar without holding that little girl at least once. The following morning, she went back to work at Fontaine's, and she did not speak of the call to anyone. 3 days later, when Max stopped by with a bag of firewood, he pressed a small prepaid flip phone into her hand without ceremony. "Every woman living alone should have one of these," he said. "I already put Sheriff Reeves's direct line in there, and mine. Don't argue with me, Eleanor. I bought 2 of them on a special." Nelly did not argue. She thanked him quietly and put the phone in her coat pocket, and she taped the sheriff's number to the inside of the boxcar door that night, though she could not have said why. 3 days after that, Hollis Wexler came into the store. Nelly did not recognize her at first. It had been almost 2 weeks. The young woman looked thinner, more tired, and she was carrying a small boy on her hip, who could not have been more than 4. But when the woman looked up from the shelf of canned soup and saw Nelly, her face changed with a kind of relieved recognition that told Nelly the church breakfast had meant something to her too. "You," Hollis said. "From the church." Nelly set down the box of crackers she was stocking. "From the church," she agreed. The boy in Hollis's arms stared at Nelly with the frank, open assessment of small children. He had dark hair and enormous brown eyes, and a small hand fisted in his mother's collar. Nelly smiled at him. He did not smile back, but he did not look away either. "This is Theo," Hollis said quietly. "I'm Hollis." "Nelly Whitaker." Hollis looked around the store, as if checking whether anyone was listening. Then she said very quietly, "Do you have anywhere I can talk to you?" They sat on 2 overturned crates in the back stockroom of Fontaine's, with the door partly closed. Ruby, who had noticed the situation immediately and asked no questions, brought them each a paper cup of coffee and closed the door the rest of the way on her way out. Hollis told her story in short, careful sentences, the way people tell stories when they have learned that details can be used against them. She had left her boyfriend 3 months earlier. His name was Dwight Barlow. He had broken her arm in July and her jaw in September. She had a restraining order. She had also learned the hard way that a restraining order was a piece of paper, and Dwight was a person. And pieces of paper did not always stop persons. She had been staying at a women's shelter in Fairmont, but she had left because Dwight had somehow figured out where it was. Since then, she had been moving. Motels when she had money, her car when she did not. She had run out of money 4 days ago. Nelly listened without interrupting. She looked at Theo, who was sitting quietly on the floor between them, with a small stuffed dog clutched against his chest. And she thought about Wren in a house 80 miles away. And she thought about what her mother had told her once, that you cannot save every child in the world, but you can pay attention to the ones who are put in front of you. "Do you have a car?" Nelly asked. Hollis nodded. "In the parking lot." "Does it run?" "Yes." Nelly thought for a moment. "I live in a freight car at the salvage yard off Route 7, she said. "It is not warm, it is not fancy, but it is safe and it is off the road and no one will find you there. You can park behind it. You can stay as long as you need." Hollis looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone once did it for me," Nelly said, though it was not exactly true. "Because I have a granddaughter I have never met," she thought. "Because if I cannot protect her, I can protect this one." They arrived at the boxcar that afternoon. Hollis's car was an old Honda with a taped-up rear window and a back seat full of garbage bags and blankets. She parked it behind the boxcar where it could not be seen from the access road. Max Sullivan came by within the hour, having seen the car from his shop, and without being asked, he brought a second wool blanket, a small kerosene heater with a full tank, and a bag of apples from a tree in his backyard. He set the heater down inside the boxcar. He looked at Hollis and Theo. He did not ask any questions. "You need anything else?" he said to Nelly. "You come find me." Theo warmed to Nelly faster than she had expected. By the second evening, he was showing her his stuffed dog, whose name was Buster, and who apparently had many adventures. By the third evening, he was calling her Grandma Nelly. Hollis apologized the first time it happened. Nelly waved it away. He can call me whatever he wants, she said. That night, after Theo had fallen asleep on the pallet bed and Hollis had gone out to the car to get another blanket, Nelly sat by the small camp stove and looked at the boy's sleeping face in the dim orange light. And she cried again. But quietly this time, because she was thinking about how easy it was to love a child who had been placed in front of her, and how strange it was that her own daughter had decided her mother could not be trusted with a grandchild she had never even been allowed to see. The routine adjusted. Hollis helped with the work on the boxcar during the day's cleaning and organizing, and sealing more of the gaps. She took Theo to a free playgroup at the library twice a week. Nelly continued her shifts at Fontaine's. Ruby, without saying anything about it, began sending Nelly home with dented cans and day-old bread that she said were going to waste anyway. Mac brought firewood and a small propane heater that was safer for enclosed spaces than the kerosene one. 6 days after Hollis arrived, Dwight Barlow found them. Nelly was outside the boxcar, splitting kindling with a hatchet Mac had left when she heard the pickup on the gravel access road. She looked up. She recognized the truck immediately from Hollis's description. Black F-150, tinted windows, a dent in the passenger side door where Hollis had hit it with a tire iron the night she left. She stood up slowly. She set down the hatchet. Hollis, she called toward the boxcar, keeping her voice level. Take Theo behind the storage unit. Now. Hollis, who had lived in fear long enough to recognize the tone in another woman's voice without needing an explanation, moved. Nelly heard the boxcar door slide, heard Hollis's quick footsteps on the gravel behind the car. The pickup stopped 20 feet from the boxcar. The driver's door opened. Dwight Barlow was a large man, broad-shouldered with a red face and the particular kind of composure that men like him mistake for calm. He walked toward Nelly without hurry. She could smell alcohol on him from 10 feet away. "Where is she?" he said. Nelly put her hand in her coat pocket and closed her fingers around the small prepaid flip phone Mac had given her. She had spent an evening working out exactly what she would say if a moment like this ever came. She had not told anyone, but she had been ready for days. "You need to leave," she said. Dwight laughed. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are." "I know exactly who I am," Nelly said. "I am the woman who is calling the sheriff right now." She lifted the phone from her pocket. "He can be here in 6 minutes. There is an active restraining order against you. If you are still on this property when he arrives, you go to jail tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. And your court date next month becomes a very different court date." Dwight took a step forward. "Put the phone down." Nelly did not put the phone down. She dialed. She put it on speaker. The line rang once. "Sheriff Reeves." Sheriff, Nelly said clearly, "This is Nelly Whitaker out at the Glendale Railard boxcar. I have Dwight Barlow on my property in violation of an active restraining order against Hollis Wexler. He has been drinking. He is refusing to leave." There was the smallest pause on the other end. Then Reeves said, "On my way. 6 minutes. Keep him talking if you can." Dwight stared at Nelly. His face was doing something complicated. She could see him calculating. She could see him deciding whether to close the distance between them. She held the phone up in front of her, and she did not move. She was 67 years old. She weighed 120 pounds. She had a hatchet at her feet she did not intend to use. She had a flip phone in her hand, and a voice she had inherited from her mother, who had once faced down a landlord with a rent increase notice and won. "You have 5 minutes to be gone," she said. "Or you have the rest of your life to think about a decision you made tonight." Dwight cursed. He cursed her and Hollis and the boxcar and the sheriff and the whole state of West Virginia. He backed toward his truck. He got in. He slammed the door hard enough that Nelly felt it in her chest. He drove away fast, spraying gravel. Nelly stood there for a moment. Her hand was shaking. She had not noticed it until now. Behind the storage unit, Hollis came out slowly with Theo in her arms. Theo was crying. Hollis was crying. When Hollis reached Nelly, she did not say anything. She just put her free arm around Nelly's shoulders and stood there. Sheriff Reeves arrived 4 minutes later. He took a statement. He put out a call for Barlow's truck. He told Hollis they would find him tonight, and they did 40 minutes later at a bar in Mannington. And Dwight Barlow spent that night in the Harrison County Jail, exactly as Nelly had predicted. That evening, after Theo had finally fallen asleep, and Hollis had cried herself out, and Mac had come by and been told what had happened and left quietly with the look of a man reassessing a situation, Nelly sat on an overturned crate near the frayed door and looked at the 12 sealed wooden crates lining the walls of her boxcar. Mac had asked her a few days earlier why she had not opened them yet. She had told him she was afraid. What if they were empty? What if there was nothing in them worth anything? Right now they were a possibility. Once she opened them, they were just boxes. But something had shifted tonight. She had stood in front of a man who had wanted to hurt a child, and she had made him leave, and she had done it herself. She had not needed Mac to come rescue her. She had not needed anyone. She had used what she had, which was a phone and a voice and the memory of her mother, and it had been enough. If that could be enough, then maybe she was ready to find out what was in the crates. She got up. She walked to the nearest crate. She picked up the flathead screwdriver Walter had left in a small toolkit she had carried out of the house on Maple Street in one of the trash bags, and she worked the tip of it under the edge of the sealed lid. It took her 20 minutes to pry the lid free without splintering the wood. The nails were all thin hand-forged, and they came out with a soft protesting squeal. She lifted the lid carefully and set it aside. She held the flashlight over the opening. Inside was paper. Hundreds of pages of it stacked in careful bundles wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them against the damp with remarkable effectiveness. She lifted the top bundle gently. She unwrapped it with hands that had begun to shake without her permission. The pages inside were yellowed at the edges but intact, covered in a dense handwriting that was precise and angular and absolutely deliberate. The handwriting of someone who wrote as if every word cost something and intended to spend each one carefully. At the top of the first page in larger letters underlined twice were the words, "Field Record of Mechanical Observations and Applied Experiments. J. Murray, Clarksburg, West Virginia, January 1902. Nelly sat down on the boxcar floor with the bundle in her lap, and the flashlight held close, and she began to read. She read for 4 hours. She read until the flashlight began to dim, and Hollis, waking on the pallet bed to see Nelly still sitting cross-legged on the floor, with pages spread around her, brought her a candle instead. Josephine Marie had been a woman who built things. The journals for that was what they were documented. 11 years of mechanical experimentation conducted in a workshop Josephine had established on the outskirts of Clarksburg in the closing years of the 19th century. She had been, according to her own carefully understated descriptions, an engineer in everything but official title, since official title was not something the world was prepared to extend to women in 1899. The journals described experiments with steam pressure and mechanical valves. They described a device Josephine called a regulated thermal converter, a mechanism designed to capture waste heat from industrial steam engines and redirect it as usable energy, reducing fuel consumption significantly. She had built 3 functional prototypes and documented each in exhaustive detail, including precise measurements, material specifications, and performance observation recorded over months of testing. The language was technical, but the voice behind it was unmistakable. Josephine Marie had been methodical, impatient with imprecision, quietly furious about the obstacles placed in her path, and absolutely certain of the value of what she was doing, even when no one around her agreed. One entry from 1904 read, "The men at the Consolidated Railway Office reviewed my converter drawings today. They were polite in the way people are polite when they have already decided not to listen. I will build the 4th prototype independently. The work does not require their belief to be valid." Nelly read that entry 3 times. She sat in the middle of her boxcar in the dim candlelight with Josephine Marie's journal open on her lap. And she thought about a woman who had lived 120 years ago, who had built something extraordinary in a workshop outside this same town, and who had been told in 100 different polite ways that she did not matter. Nelly touched the page gently. "You mattered," she said quietly to a woman who had been dead for over a century. "You mattered, and I found you, and I am going to make sure everyone knows." Nelly spent the next 3 nights reading by candlelight. She worked through the crates one by one, prying each lid carefully, cataloging what she found with the same quiet method she had used to organize the boxcar itself. Hollis helped when Theo was asleep, holding the flashlight, wrapping the pages back in their oilcloth after Nelly had read them. All 12 crates contained journals covering the years 1899 to 1910. They contained technical drawings rendered with extraordinary precision on heavy drafting paper, showing every component of Josephine's inventions from multiple angles, with measurements annotated in her careful hand. They contained correspondence letters to and from engineers, patent offices, and railway companies. Most of the replies were polite rejections. Some of them showed reluctant interest that had apparently never been acted upon. And in the last crate, wrapped separately in multiple layers of oilcloth, and then in a piece of heavy wool cloth, were the physical components of what Josephine had labeled Prototype 4. Machined brass fittings with tolerances that would have been remarkable for the era. A cylindrical chamber of some unknown alloy smaller than Nelly's fist that showed no corrosion despite a century of storage. Connecting rods and valves, each labeled with a small stamped number that corresponded to the diagrams in the journals. The device was disassembled but complete, every piece present and accounted for, stored with the care of someone who had fully intended to come back to it. Josephine had never come back. The journal simply stopped in 1910 mid-thought with no explanation. The last entry described a successful test of a valve mechanism and ended as if she had set the pen down to attend to something and had never returned. Nelly thought about that for a long time. A woman who had documented 11 years of work with meticulous care, who had built something the world was not ready for, who had preserved every piece of it in sealed crates, and who had then vanished from her own record without a single word of farewell. Whatever had happened to Josephine Marie was not written anywhere in the boxcar. But what she had built was. Nelly was not an engineer. She was not a historian or an academic. She was a 67-year-old woman who had cleaned diners and raised children and survived on $1,140 a month, and had recently learned to seal gaps in walls with weather tape. But she knew that what she was looking at mattered. She knew it the same way she had known sitting in that church reading room 3 weeks earlier that the auction notice mattered. Not because she could quantify the significance, but because she could feel the weight of it, the particular gravity of something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. On the 4th morning after opening the first crate, Nelly put on her coat, walked the 2 miles to the Clarksburg Public Library and sat down at one of the public computers. She had used a library computer exactly 3 times in her life. She was slow, she was careful. She typed with 2 fingers and consulted the small notebook she had brought with her, in which she had written down the exact spelling of every term she thought she might need to search. She searched Josephine Marie. She searched regulated thermal converter. She searched women engineers, West Virginia, 1900. Almost nothing came back. A single line in a footnote to an academic paper on gender and industrial patents. A reference in an archived list of denied applications from the West Virginia Patent Office in 1903. That was it. That was the entire recorded existence of a woman who had built 4 working prototypes of a heat recovery system 4 decades before mainstream engineers independently developed the same concept. Nelly sat in front of the library computer for a long time. Then she searched Industrial History, West Virginia University professor. She scrolled through the faculty page slowly. She found her. Dr. Elizabeth Vance, Associate Professor, Department of History. Specialization American Industrial History, late 19th and early 20th century, with particular focus on gender and labor. Nelly clicked on the email link. She typed the message with the same careful 2-finger method she had used to search, taking almost an hour to compose 4 short paragraphs. She described what she had found. She described where it was. She described that she was the legal owner. She asked politely whether Dr. Vance might be willing to look at photographs. She attached 3 pictures Hollis had taken with her cell phone the previous evening. A stenciled crate label, a page from the 1899 journal, the disassembled prototype laid out on the wool cloth. Nelly clicked send. Then she walked back to the boxcar and told no one what she had done. The reply arrived the next morning. Nelly learned this because Ruby came out to the boxcar herself, in her old Chevy pickup at 8 in the morning, honking her horn from the access road. Ruby had never come to the boxcar before. Nelly stepped out into the cold to see what was wrong. "You need to come to the store," Ruby said through the open window. "You have a phone call. Some professor. She has been calling since 7. She says she has been trying to email you back, but you have not been at the library." Nelly got into the truck without her coat properly buttoned. Ruby drove her the 1.5 miles to Fontaine's without speaking, then handed her the store phone in the back office and closed the door. Dr. Elizabeth Vance was younger than Nelly had expected. Somewhere in her 40s based on the voice. She spoke quickly in the way people speak when they are trying very hard to be professionally measured about something that is exciting them enormously. She asked 3 questions. She asked Nelly to confirm the location. She asked whether the crates and journals were secure. She asked when she could come. "Whenever you want," Nelly said. "Tomorrow," Dr. Vance said. "Is tomorrow all right?" "Tomorrow is fine." Nelly hung up and sat in Ruby's back office and stared at the desk for a full minute before she stood up. Dr. Vance arrived at the boxcar the following afternoon in a university vehicle loaded with reference materials, a laptop, photographic equipment, and the barely contained energy of a scholar who suspects she is about to have a very good week. She was tall and thin and wore wire-rimmed glasses and the slightly distracted manner of someone whose mind was always running a little ahead of her surroundings. Her professional composure lasted approximately 10 minutes. She moved through the crates with increasing velocity, cross-referencing journal entries against materials in her laptop, comparing the technical drawings to reference documents she had brought, examining the prototype components with a magnifying glass. She made small sounds under her breath that were not quite words. She photographed everything twice. After 2 hours, she sat down on an overturned crate across from Nelly and looked at her with an expression Nelly would later describe to Ruby as a woman realizing that the map she had been studying for years had just become real. "Mrs. Whitaker," Dr. Vance said carefully. "Josephine Marie is a name that appears in the historical record exactly twice. One patent office rejection letter from 1903, which was discovered in a university archive in 1987, and one single-line entry in a railway company ledger from 1905 recording payment for unspecified consulting work. That is the entirety of what the historical record contains about her." She paused. "Until today." She explained what the journals represented. Josephine Marie had been working on thermal energy recovery mechanisms decades before the concept entered mainstream industrial engineering. The regulated thermal converter she had designed and built was a functional prototype of technology that would not be independently developed by mainstream engineers until the 1940s. Her documentation was meticulous enough to constitute a complete engineering record, not just notes. A replicable technical blueprint. The historical significance extended beyond the technology itself. Josephine's journals provided a first-person account of a woman operating as a professional engineer in 1899, navigating institutional resistance with a combination of extraordinary determination and competence, and producing work of genuine innovation entirely outside the systems that should have recognized and supported her. She had been erased, not dramatically, not through any single act of deliberate suppression, but through the accumulated indifference of institutions that had simply declined to see her. And Nelly had found her. Dr. Vance stayed until dark. She took hundreds of photographs. She made careful notes on the storage conditions of the journals, the state of the prototype components, the physical structure of the boxcar itself. She asked Nelly's permission to bring a small team from the university the following week to conduct proper preservation assessment. Before she left, standing by her car in the cold November evening, Dr. Vance said something Nelly would remember for the rest of her life. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "do you understand what you have done?" "I bought a boxcar for $40, Nelly said. Dr. Vance shook her head. "You gave a woman back her name." The verification process took 6 weeks. Dr. Vance assembled a team from 3 departments: history, engineering, and material science. The handwriting in the journals was compared against the single known sample from the 1903 patent letter. It matched. The metallurgical composition of the prototype components was analyzed and found to be consistent with materials available in West Virginia in the early 1900s. The technical drawings were evaluated by a mechanical engineering historian who described them as representing a level of precision and conceptual sophistication that was, in his exact words, frankly astonishing for the period. The boxcar was officially designated a site of historical and industrial significance in February. With that designation came grant funding from the State Historical Preservation Office. Enough to properly weatherproof and secure the boxcar, install climate-controlled storage for the journals and prototype, and provide Nelly with a formal caretaker stipend. West Virginia University established a research partnership with the site. A small parking area was cleared from the gravel yard. A modest plaque was installed beside the boxcar. It read, "Mari Archive discovered by Eleanor Whitaker. 2024, established circa 1902. Nelly stood in front of that plaque on the morning it was installed and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who has done something that needed doing and did it without anyone's help or permission. Max stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets. Ruby had closed the store for an hour and driven out to sea. Dr. Vance had sent flowers Nelly found both touching and impractical, given that she had nowhere to put them, but appreciated genuinely. Her name appeared in the official historical record as discoverer and custodian of the Mari Archive. The woman who had been called a burden 4 months earlier was now listed on a state historical document as a contributor to the preservation of West Virginia's industrial heritage. Hollis and Theo were still with her. In February, Dr. Vance helped Hollis apply for an entry-level position as an archival assistant at the university, which she was offered and accepted. She and Theo moved into a small apartment in Morgantown in early March. Theo started at a preschool that was affiliated with the university and paid on a sliding scale. Before they left, Hollis stood in the doorway of the boxcar and cried for a long time and told Nelly she did not know how to say thank you for something like this. Nelly told her she did not have to. Theo hugged Nelly around the knees and made her promise to come to his 5th birthday party in June. She promised. On a Sunday morning in the middle of March, a car pulled up on the gravel access road. Nelly was in the small garden she had started along the south side of the boxcar, turning the first soft dirt of early spring with a hand trowel Mac had brought her, when he heard she was going to try to grow something. She set the trowel down and stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands and waited. She was expecting Bradford and Corinne. She had known they would come eventually. There had been a segment on the local television news 3 weeks earlier, a short piece about the Mari Archive discovery. She had known they would see it. She had known they would eventually decide to visit. She had rehearsed what she would say. But the car door that opened was not Bradford's. It was not Corinne's. Grant Holloway got out of the driver's seat. Nelly had met Grant exactly twice in her life. Once at Corinne's second wedding briefly, and once at a family dinner, where he had looked at Nelly's diner uniform with the expression of a man whose plate had a hair in it. He was a tall man, expensively dressed even on a Sunday morning, with the immediately recognizable posture of someone who was used to being the most important person in every room he entered. He walked around to the passenger side of the car. He opened the back door. A small girl climbed out. She was 6 years old. She had Corinne's dark hair and Walter's serious mouth, and eyes that were entirely her own. She was wearing a purple coat and small red mittens, and she was holding a manila folder against her chest with both hands. Nelly could not move. Grant looked at Nelly across the gravel. His face was doing something complicated. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "I owe you an apology I do not know how to give." Nelly did not answer. She was looking at the child. "Corinne does not know I'm here," Grant said. "I told her I was taking Ren to the park. I have been telling her that for the last 3 Sundays. Ren has seen you on the television. She has been asking about you every day." "I could not." He stopped. He tried again. "I made a decision 6 years ago that I had no right to make. I told my wife her mother was not fit to be in our daughter's life because of a job my wife had grown up ashamed of. I let her believe I was protecting our family. What I was doing was protecting myself from a version of us I had decided was beneath me." He looked at Nelly. "You do not have to forgive me. I am not asking you to. But this child has been drawing pictures of you for 2 years. She keeps them under her pillow. I found them last month. That is when I started to understand what I had done." Ren looked up at her father. Then she looked at Nelly. "Are you my grandma Nelly?" she said. Nelly sank slowly to her knees on the cold gravel so that she was at the child's height. Her eyes were full. Her voice, when it came, was steady because she had been practicing this voice for 4 months without knowing it. "I am," she said. "I am your grandma Nelly." Ren walked across the gravel with the careful seriousness of a small child on important business. She stopped in front of Nelly. She held out the manila folder with both hands. "I brought you my pictures," she said. "All of them. So you can see." Nelly opened the folder. Inside were 43 drawings. Some of them were the careful symmetrical pencil drawings of a 4-year-old. Some of them were the more confident crayon drawings of a 5-year-old. The most recent were in colored marker and showed an unmistakable sense of seeing a woman with gray hair standing in a garden. A small girl beside her, both of them holding tomatoes. A boxcar with a plaque. A woman on a park bench with a cardboard blanket. Ren had apparently been listening to the news very carefully. Nelly could not speak. Ren watched her face. "Do you like them?" she said. It was the anxious question of a 6-year-old who was not sure whether her gift was enough. "I love them," Nelly whispered. "I love them, honey. I have never had a better present in my whole life." Ren stepped forward and put her small arms around Nelly's neck. Nelly held her granddaughter for the first time in her life, kneeling in the gravel beside a boxcar she had bought for $40, and she cried without making a sound. Grant Holloway stood at a respectful distance and looked at the ground. They came back the following Sunday. Grant brought coffee for himself and for Nelly, and a thermos of hot chocolate for Ren. He did not stay in the boxcar. He waited in the car and read a book while Nelly showed Ren the crates and the plaque and the small garden. Ren asked 100 questions. Nelly answered every one of them. At the end of the visit, Grant said quietly before they got in the car that Corinne still did not know, that he was not sure how to tell her, that he was trying. "Take your time," Nelly said. "But this child is going to be in my life now. That part is not negotiable." "I know," Grant said. "I understand." Bradford and Corinne came the Sunday after that. Bradford had flown in from Cincinnati the night before. Corinne had called him after Grant finally told her what he had been doing on those Sunday afternoons, and something in her brother's voice, she would say later, had told her not to make this drive alone. They pulled up together in Bradford's rental car. Diane was not with him. Grant was not with Corinne. They got out slowly the way people get out of a car when they are not sure whether they are welcome to. Nelly was at the small folding table she had set up outside the boxcar sorting seed packets. She looked up. She set the packets down. She stood. Bradford spoke first this time, which was different. "Mama," he said. His voice was not the business voice. It was a voice she had not heard from him in 20 years. "Mama, we came to say we were wrong." Corinne was already crying. "Grant told me 2 nights ago," she said. "He told me he took Ren to see you. He told me why." She put her hand over her mouth. "Mama, I let him keep her from you. For 6 years. I let him. Because it was easier than fighting him. Because I told myself he knew best. Because I was ashamed of things I should have been proud of." Nelly did not answer right away. She looked at her son. She looked at her daughter. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the version of this moment she had rehearsed all winter, the anger she had prepared, the ledger of grievances she could recite from memory. She let all of it go. She had learned over these last 4 months that anger was another thing that had to be rationed carefully when you were living close to the edge. It cost too much to carry. She had carried enough already. I forgive you, she said, both, because I do not want to spend the years I have left. Bradford opened his mouth. Nelly held up her hand. But forgiveness is not forgetting, she said. And it is not going back. I built it with my own hands.
Certain peace was waiting there. I thought the storms were wrong turns taken.
I have work now.
And every burden was
I have a
unfair.
granddaughter I am going to see
So I
every
spent
month,
years
whether my mother wants
fighting
me
the
or not.
mountains,
Because that is
cursing
her
every
life.
winding road.
If you want to be part
Never
of my life
seeing
going
that
forward,
the
you are
struggle
welcome. But it will be a
was the
different
thing
life
that
than the one
made
you
me
decided
grow.
I could not manage.
The eagle learns
And it will be
within
built
the
slowly,
wind. The oak grows strong beneath the
or
snow.
it will not.
And every
Corinne
soul
was crying
that's worth becoming
Bradford
must
was
walk where hard
I am sorry, Mama, Bradford said. I know that it is a beginning. Come back when you are ready to meet all those. They did not cry. They hugged her carefully and
They were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey.
she watched them drive
Every
down the
scar
axis.
becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way.
On the evening
The
of her
mountain is
68th
the
birthday,
reason
the first
for
week
the
of
climb.
Eleanor Whitaker sat in a folding down chair outside the box. Ruby had brought a chocolate cake with white buttercream frosting.
I've known loss that left me broken. I've known fear that stole my breath. I've known nights so cold and endless I could barely take one step. Yet every wound became a teacher. Every failure left a mark. And every
Hollis
valley that I walked through
Theo had
placed
gone
another star within the dark.
and had presented it with
Doesn't
tremendous
fight the canyon, it learns to
She sat in Nelly's lap in the lone chair, wearing her
what seems a
purple
wall
coat,
to those who fear it becomes a path for those who tread.
the way 6 with
The road was never meant to be easy.
Maria
The storm was
Disco
never
Verita,
meant to
Riele,
pass. The waves were not there to stop
2024.
me.
That is
They
you,
were
Vance.
there to teach
That
me
is you.
how to
That is
last. Every trial is
That is my
part
grandma
of the
Nelly
journey.
Whitaker.
Every scar becomes a guide. The mountain
Rain
is
settled
not
deeper
in
into
my way. The mountain is
The row of trees
reason
turned
for
gold.
the climb.
The plaque beside the boxcar. Ruby was telling Mike a story. Dr. Vance was showing Hollis something in the atmosphere.
One day I stopped asking,
Theo was chasing
why
him
me?
off and slowed
And
him
started asking,
Nelly
what
held her
can I
granddaughter and
learn?
looked
The
at the
moment
boxcar she had
I
bought.
embraced the fire
And she thought about
lost its
Josephine.
power to
Josephine
burn
had
for
built something
every
extraordinary
challenge
and had been
holds a
erased by
gift.
the world that was
Though hidden from
Nelly
the
had found
eye,
her more than
the
100
obstacle and
in a locked
destination
breakdown at the county salvage auction
will
and had
never
returned her to the
separate
record.
all this.
In doing so, Nelly had
The
restored
road was never meant to be
the knowledge
easy.
that
The storm was never
That
meant
strength
to
did not
end.
require
The battles were not
that
sent to
sometimes the
break
thing
me.
everyone overlooked
They were sent to shape the man I
She
am.
had been called
Every
to
trial is part of the journey. Every loss becomes a light. The mountain is not in my way. The mountain is the reason I can rise.
She had discovered a
Thunder finds me again.
and in the process,
Dark clouds gather in
And she
the
had found the
sky.
granddaughter
I'll
she
greet them
thought.
like old companions.
Ren was falling asleep,
Because
warm against her.
they belong.
Nelly pulled her coat more tightly around them both. She looked once more at the black catching the last. Then she closed her eyes and She let the world be exactly what it was.